Inaki let me into the archive reluctantly. It was in the sacristy of the Church of Nuestra Señora de la Ascensión, a small, cold room with dark wooden shelves and brown cardboard folders labeled by hand with dates reaching back to 1650. It smelled of old paper, of wax, and of that particular scent time acquires when it accumulates in an enclosed space, not quite dust, but something more organic, as if the documents were still breathing. I searched for my aunt. Maite Goikoetsia Irayat. It took me 20 minutes to find the folder. 1975. The death certificate was handwritten, in blue ink, in the careful slanting script of a parish priest who was not Inaki, his predecessor, a certain Don Fomin Irigoyen, who served in Zugarramurdi from 1958 to 1991. Cause of death: accident in the mountains. Date: the 15th of November, 1975. A November night. Almost the same time of year I was now living through. The coincidence produced a discomfort I could not locate. There were no further details. No attached report, no medical certificate. Only a line written in the margin, in different handwriting, tighter, more urgent, which read, "God rest her soul. The mountain does not forgive those who go alone." Inaki was standing in the sacristy doorway, watching me. I asked if he knew anything about my aunt's death. "That was before my time," he said. And then, after a pause, "There are things about this village that outsiders don't need to know. And there are things that those of us inside don't want to remember either. My mother was one of yours. Your mother left." He said it without cruelty, like someone stating a meteorological fact. Your mother left, and in leaving she forfeited the right for her daughter to ask questions. That is how it works in small villages. To leave is a decision that is neither forgiven nor forgotten. I asked directly, "Does it have anything to do with the language that Conchi, Miran, and Ain speak?" Inaki did not answer. He took the folder from my hands, returned it to the shelf, and left the sacristy. Before closing the door he said, "If you go up to Berroscoberro, don't go alone." It was the second time someone had told me not to go somewhere alone. I went alone. I know. Now I know. But at the time I was a linguist with an impossible recording and a dead aunt no one would explain, and prudence was not among my priorities. Berroscoberro is 20 minutes from the village, up a forest path that wound between beeches. The beeches in late October have scarcely any leaves left, but they have present smooth trunks of a silvery grey that in the fog look like the columns of a roofless cathedral. The ground was covered in dead leaves, coppery, soaked, that muffled footsteps until the walk became something silent and strangely solemn. Like entering a church with no walls. The meadow appeared all at once, as clearings in forests tend to one more step between the trees, and suddenly the space opens, the sky descends, and you have the sensation of having entered a room that nature left empty on purpose. Berroscoberro was an oval of green grass, too green for October, I thought, too alive, surrounded by beeches forming a nearly perfect ring. There was nothing else. No structure. No monument. No visible mark that here, for centuries, the Aquelarres had been held, that the Inquisition turned into a symbol of evil. Only grass. And silence. A silence different from the forest's denser, more attentive, as if the meadow were listening. I knelt. I do not know why. It was not a religious act nor a scientific one. It was instinct. The way an animal lowers its head when approaching a river, not from thirst but from respect for something larger than itself. I placed my hands on the earth. It was warm. Not tepid warm. Like the skin of someone with a fever. The ground of a Pyrenean meadow in October, at 1,000 meters altitude, with the outdoor temperature hovering around 5 degrees, was warm as a living body. And then I felt it. A vibration. Not a tremor, it lacked the abruptness of an earthquake. It was a pulse. Rhythmic. Slow. Like an enormous heart beating far below the surface. One beat every 4 or 5 seconds, so steady and so deep that you heard it not with your ears but with the palms of your hands, with your knees sunk in the grass, with your bones. I stayed like that, kneeling, hands on the earth, feeling the pulse, for I do not know how long. It might have been minutes or it might have been an hour. Time in Berroscoberro did not work as it did in other places. It dilated. It thickened. Like the fog. The voice pulled me from my trance. "What are you doing here?" Ain stood at the edge of the meadow, between two beeches, a basket of mushrooms in one hand and an expression that was not anger but fear. Genuine fear, the kind that whitens your knuckles and dilates your pupils. I stood up. My knees were wet and the palms of my hands were red, as though the grass had left a mark. I told her I had come up to see the Akalar Meadow. Field research. Geographical context for my linguistic study. Ain did not come closer. She spoke from the trees, as though the meadow had an edge she did not wish to cross. "Don't come back alone," she said. "Never alone." "Why?" "Because the meadow listens. And if you come alone, it only listens to you." I asked what she meant. Ain opened her mouth, closed it, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, looked at the meadow the way one looks at a sleeping animal one does not wish to wake. "When we were girls," she said, lowering her voice, as though the meadow could hear her even from the trees, "our mothers brought us here in winter. At night. The three of us. Always three. Never one alone, never two. And they taught us to speak to the ground, to place our hands upon it and say the words. And the ground answered. Not with words, with calm. Like a child who settles when you sing to it. It was the most anyone had told me about the language. And Ain had released it all at once, unfiltered, like someone opening a floodgate that has been holding back water for far too long. What is beneath the ground, Ain?" Ain dropped the basket of mushrooms. She did not let it go, she dropped it, as if she had forgotten she was holding it. The mushrooms rolled across the wet grass. "Something that sleeps," she said. "And that must go on sleeping." She turned and walked away along the forest path without picking up the mushrooms. She did not look back. She walked quickly, with the urgency of someone stepping back from a precipice they have leaned over too far. I stayed at the edge of the meadow. I looked at the grass, too green. I felt the pulse, still, through the soles of my boots. And I thought, something that sleeps. That must go on sleeping. And to which three old women sing lullabies in a language that is not human. I dined with Lander that evening. At his lodgings, a flat above the village Pelota court that he had turned into a sort of field office, with maps on the walls, filing cabinets, and a whiteboard covered in notes and arrows he would not let me read up close. Lander cooked well chuleta with peppers, salad, a local rioja. He talked better. He had the eloquence of professors who have learned to turn any conversation into a lecture. He told me the history of the 1610 trials with the detail of someone who had been studying it for years. In 1608, a young woman from Zugarramurdi named Maria de Zimildegi returned from France where she had been accused of witchcraft. Her confession triggered an investigation that culminated in the largest witchcraft trial in Spanish history. The Inquisition tribunal at Logrono prosecuted 31 people from Zugarramurdi and surrounding villages. 11 were condemned. 6 were burned alive. 5, who had died in prison, were burned in effigy. The official story, Lander said, pouring more wine, is that it was mass hysteria. Suggestion, social pressure, torture during the interrogations. The Inquisitor Alonso de Salazar Frias, the most rational of the tribunal, was sent to verify the accusations and concluded there was no evidence. His report is famous. There were no witches or bewitched until people began to talk and write about them. He essentially said the Inquisition had created the problem it claimed to be solving. But, I said, because the way Lander had said official story implied there was another. But, he smiled, there is something the official story does not explain. Salazar Frias wrote a private letter to a colleague in Seville. The letter was not published until 1972, when a historian found it in an ecclesiastical archive. And in that letter, Salazar the rationalist, the skeptic, the man who discredited the entire trial, wrote a sentence that no historian has been able to explain. Landa produced a photocopy from a drawer. He spread it on the table between the plates. It was a reproduction of 17th century manuscript, cramped and slanting, in an archaic Spanish that was difficult to read. Landa pointed to a paragraph. I read it. As for what is heard in the cave of which the accused speak, I attest that I heard it myself, and that it is a thing neither of the devil nor of God nor of man, but of something older than all of them, and that it is better neither to name it nor to attempt to understand it, for the understanding of certain things is the door through which they enter. I read the sentence 3 times. The understanding of certain things is the door through which they enter. Enter who? I asked. Landa retrieved the photocopy. That, he said, is exactly the right question. I returned to the guest house past midnight. The fog had swallowed the entire village. I could not see beyond 2 meters. I walked the streets from memory, running my fingers along the stone walls to keep from losing my way. The stone was cold, normal. But when I reached my door and touched the handle, it was warm. I went to bed. I set the recorder. I closed my eyes. And this time I did not fall asleep. I lay awake, waiting. At 3:16, 1 minute earlier than usual, the murmur began. I heard it without headphones. Not through the recorder, through the floor. Through the mattress. Through my own bones. It was louder than the previous nights. Or I was more attuned. Or both. The murmur filled the room like water filling a bathtub, slowly, unhurriedly, covering every surface, every corner, every silence. And within the murmur, with a clarity that froze my blood, I recognized the pattern Mirren had said meant good morning. Only now, hearing it in context, surrounded by the other frequencies, preceded by a silence that functioned like a question mark, I knew it did not mean good morning. It was a question. The same question, repeated with the patience of something that has been asking for centuries. Are you there? And my mouth, without my commanding it, without my brain participating in the decision, formed a word in the language that was not mine. A word that meant I knew with a certainty that came from no dictionary. Yes. I pressed both hands over my lips. I pushed them against my face. Because what I had just felt was not fear. It was relief.